Welcome to Bootstrapped Unicorns. I'm your host, Josh Pies, the chief attention getter and hippie capitalist at C47 Digital Studios. This show is an exploration of entrepreneurship because it's important to hear people's inspirational stories of where they were and where they're going and how they've gotten to where they are. But even more important is to glean all those tactical, actionable data points that we can use on our own journeys as we grow our businesses and we can say, yes, we bootstrapped to become a unicorn.
Hey, if you've been following along, you know we're doing something a little bit new, and this is yet another run at it. I'm Josh Pies, the chief attention getter and hippie capitalist over here, and you are watching and or listening to Bootstrapped Unicorns. But this is episode 2 with Dawn Sipley. This is where I'm suddenly the guest. And I don't know if she's got questions. I don't know where we're going with this. It's kind of an ask me anything moment. I don't know if I'm going to bring anything of value, but I will certainly try. That's my very small promise to you. Dawn, what are we doing here?
Yeah, thank you so much. When I saw that I got to do the role reversal, I was just so excited. I've done an interview or two during my lifetime.
I know you have. Yes.
So what I just wanted to start off with, because I believe that origin stories are just so powerful. What do I need to know about Josh Pye's childhood to understand the man who's sitting in front of me today?
All right. I don't actually know where to start.
Okay.
So the truth is, my father died 2 years ago.
Okay.
And when he died, and it's a complicated man, complicated relationship.
Mm-hmm.
I found a way to process it by starting the voice recorder on my iPhone while I'm driving. I got a long drive in. It's about an hour to get to the office. And so I would record voice memos, rehashing memories, chronicling, childhood, whatever. It's not like I go to therapy. I was going to self-therapy, right?
Right.
I have 40 plus hours of recording on that. And I've listened back to a couple of them and I'm like, oh, I might be messed up.
What did you learn from that experience? Because there's processing that happens when we say things out loud.
Well, and I did notice that parenting decisions actually affect the children, and no matter how hard or purposed I can be about some things, even my own decisions are sometimes molded by a reaction to something that happened 30 years ago. And so as a parent, I think I'm getting a little bit sharper, that I'm seeing things that I can do better for my kids that weren't necessarily done for me. So I grew up in Rochester, New York, a nice cold area. And I have very early memories of my dad trying to leave. And my mom begging him to stay. And she would always credit God with, he had a sports car and he'd have all of his clothes. He'd be throwing them in the back of the car. And then the engine would just magically not start. Brand new sports car, but the engine wouldn't start.
Right.
And she always credited God with stopping that so he couldn't go.
Okay.
As an adult, I look back and I go, I don't know, because I think he was supposed to go.
Right.
But, that's complicated. And I've got a lot of theories on that. But so there was a lot of that turmoil when I was a kid. And I didn't know until I was in my teens that he actually had 2 families. And so he had my family, and then he had a family with a woman named Susan on the other side of our town. And it was a big town, but not that big, right? And I had a little brother. And so he was literally running 2 separate households that did not interact with each other. My mom knew, the other woman knew, but the kids didn't know about each other. And so then he did some dirty business deal and caused somebody to lose, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the only recourse in this guy's mind was to send letters to every neighborhood that was associated with our grandparents and our aunts and uncles. And he found all of that and got a distribution list and outed all of his dirty laundry. And so they had to tell me when I was 13. And I remember it was coming up on the winter, and I was splitting wood. And at 13 years old, I was sledge and wedge splitting wood for the winter heating, and I just went out and blistered my hands to get all the anger out, because it was so confusing. I didn't quite know what to do, and I wouldn't meet my brother Zach for another 5 years. Of all things, he showed up on my graduation party day at my house and became the center of attention. My graduation party was destroyed by this rabid 10-year-old who had been reasonably unparented, because that, that happens with the other family, right? He was married to my mom.
Right.
They were the extra family.
Right.
And so he was a wild child, and we ended up having a pretty good relationship after a while, which is pretty interesting.
That's fascinating in itself.
But then later he got pinched for major like federal crimes, and the news reporter figured out that he had 3 families.
Oh,
yes.
Okay.
So there was the stripper in the other town who he had bought a McMansion for and all this other stuff, which it's funny. I look back and I go, he actually was really good at business to be able to even keep any plate spinning and pay for a number of those things and move those financial, shells around.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean he was good, right? But he was very good at business. And so I look at that character who was a thread through my entire life. And there were moments that, he was coaching my baseball team. And so there's some definitely good memories. Yeah. But there's a lot of crap that happens through there.
Yeah.
And so talk about parentifying, I was fixing broken things in the house.
Yeah.
I was, calming mom when she was sobbing downstairs and I didn't know why.
Right.
There was just a lot there where, I had to be more of an adult than not. And dinner table conversation wasn't safe, right? You couldn't talk about feelings. You couldn't talk about what happened at work,
right?
Because what happened at work might not have been what happened at work, and it could be,
you
other
probably
activities.
Don't want to know,
right? No, certainly. And of course, as a kid, I wouldn't have. But all it was business and economics,
right?
So I grew up talking about the most recent real estate deal, presidential, whatever that might affect the macro economy.
Right.
We would run numbers on napkins at the table. And my dad chain smoking. He would go through 3 packs at dinner. And,
wow.
And so, there would be the smoke-filled room, a full plate, and then and finances. And that's how we all had common ground. We could all run numbers.
Right.
And so that was what I was doing as a child. And so as a result, I was exposed to what I would say is actually a lot of quality business conversation. He might have been making a lot of poor moral decisions that affected his personal business activity, right? Because he got pinched for major crimes and swindled a lot of people. But he wasn't talking about the bad side of it with me and teaching me how to be a criminal. He was actually just talking about good business. Right. Had he not had those vices, he might have been very rich and very good at business. Yeah. So I started a business at 4 years old that was cash positive to the point where we were $1,600 a year.
Okay.
It's 1984.
Yeah, that's big money.
That's big money back then. I've inflation adjusted that kind of recently. That's more like about $5,500 to $6,000. So that's pretty darn good for a 4-year-old.
Yes.
Door-to-door sales, manufacturing key racks. My mom kept losing her keys.
Okay.
And my neighbor's
and
mom.
And you found a solution.
Yeah, my neighbor's mom had a key rack and she never lost her keys. Okay. So I told my grandfather and we made it as a gift. Okay. But he was an industrial engineer who was a product of the Depression. He goes, if we're going to build a key rack, we should be building key racks. Right. And then he asked me what I'm going to do with them. And we gifted a couple of them. And he goes, well, the whole family now has key racks. What are we going to do with all the other key racks? Right. And I was like, and he led me to the idea that I should sell them. And then it was a time and day where I could go door to door with my carpet bag and sell. I was selling deals where, one was $2.50, 2 was $4. Right. And so a lot of people had 2 key racks when they only needed 1 because I was cute. And so that is how I grew up. And I started a similar door-to-door sales business for Christmas products at 8 years old. I had businesses all the way through life, frankly. I've been a W-2 employee twice. I was a janitor at my church. Okay. I'm a terrible janitor. Okay. I don't want to do that job. Right. But I gave it a try and they were gracious as they fired me. And then I was a property manager at, 3 times. I was a property manager for a couple of years. Okay. And that was W-2. And I was at 21 upper middle management, like overnight. Weird story on how it all happened, but it was just opportunity after opportunity after opportunity. And I was the only one there who even had any of the training. And so last man standing, you're a kid. Yeah. Actually, I remember my boss sent me to Men's Warehouse and he goes, all your employees are 40 and over. Right. You need to look the part. Yeah. And he took me to Men's Warehouse and made me
look like a man.
Yeah, that's right.
It's like Pretty Woman, the male version.
Right. Yeah.
And kind of gutsy you up a little bit.
Further story on that too is my now wife, we dated in college, would not get near me when we were in college. And it was because I was wearing a suit. Somebody started a rumor that I was a professor, and the only way to get an A with me was to be a bad girl. And so she had no interest in being around me because she wanted to be a good girl.
Right.
And so I wear the suit because my boss insisted.
Right.
And I cannot get her to get near me for anything. 6 months of trying to get her attention.
Wow.
And then a mutual friend, weird chick, but a mutual friend ended up sitting with her. And I was like, this is my in. And so I ended up I had such a big backpack that I hit people in the head by accident as I swung around to sit down next to her.
Right.
And then we were dating within 3 days.
Wow.
And that was early 2022.
Okay.
And there hasn't been a day since January of 22 that we haven't talked to each other or seen each other ever since. But it almost didn't happen because of that damn suit.
Well, that's Barney Stinson would say that's the suit helps with the ladies. It doesn't deter from the ladies.
You would think, right? A good show, by the way. Very good show. So what other questions do you have for me? And did that even answer your question?
No, I love that. I think that paints a really good picture. And what it allows me to see in you is I think you share your father's charisma. Because someone without a personality could not pull off those great feats, whether they were moral or immoral by someone's standards is one thing, but to have the art of persuasion as an entrepreneur is just absolutely an amazing skill set. He could sell
ice cubes to Eskimos for sure.
Right.
I won't because they don't need them.
Right. Yeah. Now, you mentioned being a young leader. How do you think being a young leader, instructing people that know more than you, that have lived more life than you, how did that develop you as an entrepreneur down the road when you were solo?
Actually, that's a great question. I wish I could remember the guy's name. There was one point, I remember saying it out loud. I have 17 employees. I'm 21. I almost have as many people that work for me as my years.
Yeah.
And he spoke more Spanish than English.
Okay.
And he was the property custodian at one of my buildings. I had 3 buildings, all low income housing, all Section 8. It was a fascinating challenge. Yeah. And he had an edge about working for me, and I could see it. And I remember talking to him one day and going, I'm sorry. And he said, what? I go, I don't know if you should have had this job or not. It's just, this is just kind of what is.
Yeah.
But I do know there's a problem to solve.
Right.
And I also know how to turn a wrench. Can I help? And I remember not being allowed to help. He didn't think it was a good idea. But the fact that I asked changed things. Yeah. And so that was an interesting experience where, it was just me being pretty real with the guy and not even pretending that there was an ounce of me above him. There was positional authority, but it didn't mean that it was actual authority.
Right.
Right. He had more authority. He'd been with that building apparently for a decade plus.
Right.
And he was way older than I was.
Yeah. You were in grade school.
His kids were almost my age.
Right. Right.
Right. And so a lot of it felt very, very backwards. But I had the academic training and I had the network. And that put me well above him. Like if we're looking at positional, I was many tiers above him, but there was nothing about me that was above him. And I hadn't even had the thought, like I knew, I suppose I could have, if I were a different person, been like, yes, I am the man. You are my employee. You shall do this.
Right.
And that would have destroyed the relationship and he probably would have quit. But I was actually scared of that job. There was a lot to do. And there was a lot of people at stake.
Yeah.
And a lot of really weird dynamics because, Section 8 in and of itself, everybody's impoverished and there's a lot of government rules around it.
Yeah.
But each one of my buildings had a different mandate. One of them was taking people from a place called Sojourner House, which was a kind of a women's rehab / halfway house / get them away from the abuser. Like they did all sorts of things that are really positive for the women. And the Sojourner House is kind of hidden.
Right.
You're not really supposed to know where it is to protect people. But then their next spot was my building. And so you've got a lot of people who have a lot of situations happening. And for whatever reason, they felt like I was supposed to know. So now I'm 21 and not them, like they're caseworkers, right? Like you got to know this lady's story.
Right.
So, but if I screwed up something from like the government side and, the Section 8 side, it could jeopardize the mandate of the entire building. And therefore all these people who are trying to get better might have everything pulled out from under them.
Right.
That was scary.
So pressure.
That was very scary. And then we had the YWCA. I actually had that whole building.
Okay.
And I wasn't even allowed in my building unless I had a security escort and 2 caseworkers because men weren't allowed in the building. So for me to do that one, like that mandate was really high. And so I didn't even really understand the dynamics of that. I mean, I'm a 21-year-old college kid with this thing happening. It was a lot.
Yeah.
It was a whole heck of a lot. So, so it shaped me. I kind of had the fear of God in that situation of, there's a whole bunch of people doing good in the world and somehow I'm in charge of the building that they do good in.
Right.
But if I misstep, all that they're doing is in jeopardy.
For not.
And if I misstep, my integrity is in jeopardy as well, because a lot of these women were former prostitutes. And so I had to be very careful about who's in the room, open door policies and all that
Boundaries,
stuff.
Yeah.
I had never even processed that at that age.
Right.
And so there was just a lot there. And then I've carried a lot of that forward. You know? And so now I'm just like, oh, is this a situation that is more kid gloves than an everyday situation? We just have to be careful with it.
Yeah.
And so it has shaped me.
Yeah. I can imagine.
Yeah.
There's a really big, one thing we talked about generations and during our time together previously. And I think one thing that this younger generation is lacking is some grit.
I know.
And some perseverance.
Yep.
They're dynamic, they're self-learners, they're independent, but you put them through a hard circumstance, their rebound time is wildly longer than some of us.
I hesitate to call them quitters, but there's some quitting.
Right. Yeah. And only because they haven't been able to flex that muscle of realizing that you can push through and you can persevere and you can kind of go past that. So I think it's an absolutely vital thing of entrepreneurs. And that's probably why we see so many parentified entrepreneurs in the marketplace and being really successful, because they're risk adverse. They know how to have uncomfortable conversations. They do what others are unwilling, to do. So I love that. Now, that kind of childhood would also lend me to think that it would have an impact on how you view women.
Well, that's interesting. So I have always wished that my mom had the grit to stand up and walk away.
Is your mom still with us?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah. She may see this episode.
Okay.
Yep. And she needed to for herself. She needed to be stronger for herself and believe in herself more. And it really took a lot of her potential, because she's a woman of great potential, but I don't think she lived her fullest potential because she really dug in and lived for that guy. Yeah. And my dad was. That's
what they were raised to do. In that generation.
Yeah. And I think some of it's personality type as well.
Okay.
But he was somebody who responded to hard truths and ultimatums.
Okay.
And she didn't have that. And so I don't know what the future would have held, but I think she deserved to be able to say, no, this behavior is something that we're not going to rescue. You're unwilling to change your behavior. This will be hard, but we're out. Yeah. And it didn't happen. So my view on women is, it's funny. I'm thinking about it. So I worked for my dad for a very short amount of time.
Oh, interesting.
He eventually worked for me, which was a terrible idea. Those are very long stories for another time.
Right.
But when I worked for him, there was a bar across the street called Pillars, and we would go grab their Philly cheesesteak. Was actually surprisingly good for not being in Philadelphia.
Okay.
And so I'd go have a Philly cheesesteak, and if he didn't come with me, there would be women who would come and find me and go, "You're Steve's kid, right?" And I'd be like, "Yeah." And they're like, "Can you get him to stop hitting on me?" Or I went on a couple of dates with him and I didn't know he was married. Can you get him to back off? He won't leave me alone.
Right.
And that kept happening
and
happening. And so, it was an interesting dynamic, but I was watching that everyone who came to me didn't want to be the other woman. They didn't want to be the person who broke a home. They were actually looking for real relationships. And so in retrospect, as I started kind of digesting that, I was like, okay, so And some women fall into it where they do want to be the other woman
Right.
or want to break up a relationship to be the only woman. And that's not okay. But in my experience, more of them wanted to be in a stable,
Right.
real relationship than
Right.
not.
Right.
And I think that was my mom trying to cling to fix something that was so broken, but she couldn't fix it,
Right.
but was going for that.
Right.
And so I just look at that and I go, okay, so I see where a lot of women's hearts are. And they like I tell my daughters, you know, we have two daughters, one son, that they need to be strong enough to be without a man.
Right.
You got to be economically strong enough. You got to have a mindset that's strong enough. Now you can enjoy, you can partner, but if the day comes where you need to stand on your own 2 feet,
Right.
you can't be economically tied to somebody in a way where you have to make bad decisions.
Right.
And I know part of that was my mom's situation.
Right.
So I look at women as in need of taking themselves seriously enough to not put themselves in that awful position of either having economic ties or so unduly emotional ties that you can't stand up for yourself. And we know it happens.
Right.
But I was, when I had that realization that there was a lot of women who didn't want that, I was like, okay, that's
There's
actually
still
cool.
good women out there.
Yeah, well, there's a lot
Right.
of them, right?
Yeah.
A lot of them. So yeah, it did shape my thought around that. And, you know, I struggled with, you know, those 2 other women that I found out about. Oh, did I hate their guts for a long time? And forgiveness takes a long journey.
Right.
You know, a teenage boy does not take kindly to seeing that. And so I had some harsh words.
Especially when you're so close to your mother and you can see the pain that it's causing her. And it was kind of your mess to clean up.
A little bit.
Sometimes.
Yeah. A little bit. Not always.
Yeah.
But a little bit.
Yeah.
So I certainly don't, I'm high on the belief that women can be in it for themselves in a way that's not, that sounds awful, but you know,
it's not selfish.
It's not selfish, but still focused on their own health.
Right.
And broad term on what health
self-preservation is something that we all have to have some kind of
Shannon and I talk about this a lot. So my wife is Shannon, and so we talk about how important it is to give that to our girls.
Right.
Not that we won't also impart something like that to Will, but there is unfortunately kind of a dynamic difference between boys and girls, and some girls chase men and their approval, and we just we don't want that for them.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It's important.
Absolutely. Now, I have interviewed a lot of people, and I would say that you're the first one that grew up in a family who had 2 other outside families.
I don't know anybody else who had that one.
Yeah. So is that where you got your unique flair? Is this where the quirkiness entered the life of?
No, Quirk is my uncle.
Okay.
So my uncle Seth is a classically trained jazz drummer.
Was this your father's brother?
My mom's brother.
Your mom's brother. Okay.
Actually, truth be told, if my father was my only male influence, I would probably be just like him. The men in my life who helped show me what it meant to be a good Christian man were my grandfather, my mom's dad. His son, my uncle Seth, and then my good friend who's probably about 15 years older than me, Pastor Steve Edlin.
Okay.
And so those 3 guys showed me what it meant to be a strong alpha male who can also be godly and toe the line when it comes to all things moral. And not a perfect guy here, but at the same time, they just showed me a better way. So Seth is professionally a weirdo. We listened to Frank Zappa together, which is really weird music. We love Weird Al. You know, his eclectic taste in like weird fusion jazz, and he sent me something Kazakhstani fusion jazz funk is like I shared it with you, Miller. I'm pointing over there. He remembers it from last year.
Wow.
It just shows up in my text messages, and this is he's just an odd dude in the coolest ways.
Right.
He's also one of the world's foremost acoustical engineers who are, I would say, designers. So if you go to a stadium or you see a specific type of design in a mega church, it's very possible he designed it.
Oh, interesting.
And he's the one who was training me in all of this stuff. The reason why I'm in this industry the way I am is because of my uncle. Okay. So yeah, that's, and he does not dress loud. He goes under the radar until he wows you with weirdness in other ways.
At least we were forewarned with you.
Yeah. Oh yeah. You can see me coming. I am like a searchlight. You can't miss me. True story. I went to John Maxwell certification in 2018 because he was a client, and they were all like, but you need to be certified. And Like, whatever, I'll do that. So I went for 5 days and I wore, Shan bought me the Pac-Man jacket. It's a whole Pac-Man board. And then my follow-up one was the Batman jacket with the bang, pow, zoom from like the 1970s.
Yes.
And so I wore those two, kind of just cycling them because it's all I had at the time. And everybody knew me, 2,500 people, everybody knew me by the end of the 5 days. And John gets up on stage because they did a feel-good recap video.
Right.
I was in more of it than John. And so he got on stage and he goes, well, Josh, apparently you should be teaching this. And
the highest of compliments.
Yeah. It was really funny. And I'm glad he knew me. But yeah, I realized that the loud dressing thing is actually a great attention getting tool. Yeah. And so I'm just willing to live out loud on that level.
Yeah, they call it the bow tie effect. So I actually wear hats very often, especially if I am in crowds. So when I follow up professionally, I can be, hey, I was a crazy hat lady, and they know exactly who I am. They remember me, and we're able to connect that way. So when you and I had first met in person, I think we were digitally connected before we had spent any time in person.
Rick Graves connected us.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, this guy's taking this bow tie effect to a whole new level. I love it.
So I used to own a major snowplowing company. And that is...
know nothing about that. Born and raised right here in Central Florida.
Yeah, born and raised in Rochester, New York. It is the second snowiest city in the United States.
Really?
Or actually in North America.
Okay.
It's the lake effect. It all comes off the lake and just pounds the lake.
Right.
Pounds Rochester and Buffalo and Syracuse. There's a race that they do every year to see who got more snow.
Okay.
But anyhow, so while I was selling, I decided that I was going to be the only cowboy who could ride 500 horses. And one of our wheel loaders had a 500 horse Cummins diesel engine in it.
Okay.
Actually 501 horses. And so I wore a cowboy hat and cowboy boots and shopped only at Tractor Supply at the time. And I would walk into a property manager's office or like the district manager for Rite Aid Eckerd's or whatever. I'd be like, howdy.
Right.
I'm not Southern. I'd never been to a Southern state. And they'd be like, can I help you? I'm like, well, I wanted to bring my horses to you. And they'd be like, why? I go, I can ride 500 horses all at once. And I think I should tell you about it. And they'd be like, who are you?
Right.
And I'd be like, I own a snowplowing company and my biggest wheel loader is 500 horses. Frankly, it won't fit in your parking lot, but I got a lot of good trucks and a lot of good people. Could we bid your parking lot? And they'd be like, yeah, of course you can.
Right.
I don't have cowboys come in my office ever.
Right.
Like, I reckon is probably not the case. That's right. And I just put the act on.
Yeah.
And then I dropped the stupid Southern after a few minutes. And then my favorite question would be, what's your budget? And they'd hand me the previous year's thing and they'd show me their line item. Yeah. And I'd pencil it up and I'd close the deal right there. And then they'd hire the cowboy.
Yeah.
And so I took the cowboy thing and did it. I've done it in 3 different industries. I had a producer look when I was only doing movies. And now I have, loud apparel for when I'm only doing marketing.
Right.
So yeah, it works.
You can't be bigger, better, faster, but you can be weirder.
That's, chasing weird is a challenging thing because at some point it just goes too far. And I haven't found the too far thing. I just imagine there is.
Well, that was going to be my next question. Has it bit you in the butt?
A little bit, actually. Okay. I was a little miffed recently when I wasn't prepared to dress loud. And I showed up somewhere and everybody was like, are you sick? Are you okay? Where's the loud clothes? And I did get a vibe of kind of like, am I your clown? Am I here for your entertainment? And I didn't enjoy that moment. So I'm trying to figure out how to actively, like, this is another conversation we're kind of actively having is, have I gone too far with it? Right. Or do we need to find maybe a different bow tie? And I don't know. We'll figure it out. I really actually like the loud clothes. That's if it is genuine. A problem. Right. Then I actually have a problem because I really like the loud clothes.
Right.
So we'll see.
I love that.
And we'll do one more question if you got it, but this experiment seems to be going okay.
Yeah, fantastic. So I think my last question would be if you could give the 18-year-old self one piece of advice, knowing everything that you know now in business, what wisdom would you impart on that young man who's got all these crazy dreams in his heart, maybe a little bit of anger and angst and wildness about him?
There's 2 things. One of them is very quick.
Okay.
Don't hire your dad.
Okay. All right.
Simple.
We'll do a whole podcast just on that season.
Probably. Yeah. And in all honesty, you talk about writing a book and talking about the parentification stuff. I'm maybe one of your case studies.
Okay.
So what I would tell my 18-year-old self actually is don't don't self-identify as the career that you're in. Yeah. So
say it louder for those in the back, because I spend half my life deprogramming, especially men, their worth based on their job title.
Yep. And I still have moments where I even struggle with it today. But at 18, I was being scouted by a whole bunch of pro baseball teams, and they had set me up to be the Division I catcher at West Virginia University. I had the letter of intent. All that was happening. 3 rotator cuff tears later, I can barely throw a ball.
Right.
And so I lost that, but I was, even though I had all those little businesses that I told you about in a previous episode, or maybe it was just now, I don't know, I'm losing track. But I mean, I had that part of me, but I also had the athlete part of me, which is actually how I connected with my dad.
Right.
But it all crumbled. And so then who am I?
Right.
Right. And so then I go to college thinking I'm going to be an engineer because I like being creative. And my grandfather engineer, my uncle a designer who does engineer like things. Okay. And I always wanted to be an inventor, and I thought that was creative. That was my type of creativity in my mind. Right. Now I do very creative things, but I hadn't connected where my creativity ought to go. And so I flunked out of engineering school. And then so within 18 months of losing baseball, I lost engineering. Oh, yeah. And I'm like, what do you do? And so then I end up starting, and I'm jumping a whole bunch of things, but I get to my next major success moment because it's very successful to be scouted. And then I go and start the snowplowing business. It's a multi-million-dollar business, 35 employees, blah, 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 written up in national magazines, all this stuff. Right. And then, you don't know any of these details, but my dad steals a whole bunch of money and crashes the business, and I'm left holding the bag. Bankrupts my multi-million-dollar business. And I was the guy who had made good hometown, and everybody saw me lose everything. Yeah. So now who am I? So I had another who am I? So 3 who am I's, and I haven't even hit 30. Right. And then we had a TV show on through our church that was sketch comedy, and it ended up blowing up. And now I'm not being paid, but people are seeing us all over the world. What the heck? Right. And Shannon looked at me because I was training to be a police officer. Interesting. I figured stable retirement. Right. I could be chief of police in my hometown. I knew that. I totally could land that. It's just hard work. Right. And interestingly, apparently I had the right profile for that. I don't know. Yeah. But she's like, you're also the guy who's going to run in front of a bullet to save somebody. That you can't do this and you're happy here. And I hadn't been able to step outside of it because I was in crisis management mode. And so she was like, no, you're happy here. Chase this. I'm like, and I couldn't figure out how to chase a TV show where we didn't get paid. Right. And so we worked through it together, figured it out. And that's actually how I got into the film and television side of my life at 28 and a half years old. Okay. And and now having lost my identity three and a half times. Yeah.
Who's Josh?
Who is Josh? Josh is somebody who cares enough about people to try to empower them to build the life that they're living. That's all I can do. Yeah. That's portable. I can do that anywhere. Yeah. That's why I'm on the school board. That's why I want more employees, because I want to grow them in place and allow them to thrive at their skill sets. That's why we serve mostly entrepreneurs in our business, because entrepreneurs hire people and build their tribes and do well by them. Yeah. So if I can help an entrepreneur hit from 1 million to 10 million, the likelihood that it's all going into their pocket is low, because they've got to hire people to get there, which means we're helping families. Right. We're a part of the lifeblood of the economy. Yeah. I believe economic development. Yep. I believe in that ecosystem. And so I could be doing this in shoe sales. I could be doing this in nonprofit because it's building people. Right. So that's who Josh is more now than anything. So 18-year-old Josh, don't become your career. Yeah. I love that. Yeah. Thank you so much for being vulnerable with me today. Yeah, you're welcome. This is fun. Hey, unicorns, as you're watching this, you're like, wow, that was a different episode. Yeah, it really was. And I'm willing to do this again. So a couple of things. One, if you want to come on this show, ask. And, you might be the right profile and person to share your story and then flip it on me and ask some questions. But if you'd like one of our guests to ask me something, this is interesting. This is different. Yeah. I'll totally do this. So send us questions. I'm very game. Now, I will also remind you that Dawn Sipley is the owner of Sipley the Best. It is a HR consulting firm that helps your business really wrap your head around how to hire, and how to fire and how to manage all of that in between. And so if you haven't done well by that, or you intend to get a lot better at it, you need to go to simplythebest.com or find Dawn and her team at Simply the Best on just about any social platform. And you can learn more and hopefully start engaging and grow your business. That's why we're here. Next episode, I have no clue who's going to be on, but it's going to be awesome because they're here for you. And that's why we do what we do. Now, get back to work.